In Major Glenn Ignazio, former U.S. Air Force Special Operations pilot and commander. Good to see you, sir. Appreciate it. From the interview that we just heard from the Ukrainian parliament member, there's continuing this discussion of closing the skies. Are the Russians' air power really doing all that much, or are they all that effective these days inside of Ukraine?
Yeah, actually, two parts to that question. The Russians are flying approximately 200 sorties a day, or 200 flights, and the Ukrainians are lucky if they're getting about 10, and that's because of the difference in the volume of aircraft. So the Russians are still being able to take out airstrikes, but they still don't have air dominance because there are a lot of surface-to-air missiles that the Ukrainians have been firing at the Russians, and they've lost a lot. But yes, there are still strikes still happening, and that's an incredible volume of 200 aircraft and those sorties to be able to take action against the cities and the people. So the air is still a contested environment with not really one dominating the other.
Congressman Mark Green, formerly, and you'll know what this means, of the Army 160th, the Night Stalkers. He was the flight surgeon there in the helicopter squadron, talking about what it's taking right now to get the weapons that the U.S. is sending into Ukraine to the Ukrainians. Take a listen.
We made cuts to our military industrial base, so the diameter of the pipeline, so to speak, is really, really small based on the need that we have right now. So we got to put more weapons in that pipeline. That means we got to make more weapons.
And basically talking about how the Ukrainians are asking for 500 Stinger missiles a day and 500 Javelins. There's only a possibility of making about 6,000 in a year. Do the Ukrainians have enough anti-aircraft systems to take down the planes you were talking about?
I think right now it is pretty good. I don't want to say it's greatly robust, but it is pretty good because they were getting, some of these man-portable systems. You'll hear the term called man-pads, where they are able to use, those are Stingers, and some of the bigger platforms that have a bigger reach. Now, the interesting, part with the NATO countries and the other European countries supporting this is being able to get weapons from Germany, the UK, and of course from the United States. And actually, there's another system that's actually Russian-made coming from Slovakia to be able to be moved into the Ukraine. So the important part is to pull all the countries together and make sure that supply chain is there for these weapons, because as soon as they're used, they need to be replenished. And that is significant and important for the Ukrainians to maintain their defense.
Yeah, at some point, it's just kind of a math problem. If we come back to the big map, the thing we've been talking about now for the past 5 weeks is the supply lines from the NATO base in Poland, where everything's being flown into, and then the ground lines through Lviv, out to Kyiv, out here to the east, down to Odessa. That's what's continuing to allow the Ukrainians to fight. And obviously, the flip side of this is the Russian supply lines are getting harassed on the ground by the Ukrainians. If the Russians are able to fly 200 sorties a day and put fighter jets and bombers over western Ukraine, why haven't we heard of any of these convoys of U.S. weapons being hit yet?
Well, there's two good points to that. Is you're right, that supply chain is long, and that country is approximately 700 miles across. So there is an extensive range. These aircraft are launching out of Russia. Based on their range, can they get all the way to the far west? That's a little difficult, but that's why they use some of the cruise missiles. But their smart weapons, like cruise missiles, have a 60% fail rate, and it was a U.S. intelligence report that stated that. So the idea that the Russians are sort of pulling back to that eastern line, I believe that they extended themselves very, very far. Their idea was to surround cities and then starve them and bomb them out. We actually saw this extensive bombing. But the Ukrainians held them to bay very well, and you see them sort of pulling back to the border lines and digging in, and pretty much going to probably reinforce themselves and be able to sustain that supply chain on the Russian side, since they'll be closer to the Russian border.
Yeah, and that goes to what we're seeing certainly in the eastern part of the country, where they're not only closer to the Russian border, but they've got at least more of the hearts and minds of the civilian population there. And this was a great conversation, Major. I'm glad we made time for it. Thank you for making time. We'll talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you. Have a good night.
Yeah, good night. The